Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramsay. When it comes to matters of economies and politics, there's only one guest I would ever have on the program, and that's Mariano Browne, managing partner of Browne & Company. Welcome back to the program. As we saw you in the opening montage there, it's only appropriate that you're sitting here right now. Now, we have a situation. I'm going to ask you first of all, what's happening in Greece? Is it a really cautionary case study for us, or is it something so bizarrely unique to the world of economics that there is no parallel?
No, there are some lessons in it. And there are lessons in it for the Caribbean. We have some countries in the Caribbean that are pretty close to Greek standards. And also a lesson in it, the need to take corrective measures and to take them in a strong fashion as to take them early. Because the longer you leave them, the more difficult they become. This is Greece's effectively third adjustment program. They had two before, and they haven't worked. So this is the third one. And in fact, when the financial crisis hit in 2008, Greece had a very high GDP, debt to GDP ratio. It was 100%. Now it's 178%. And that's the cost of not meeting your obligations and postponements
so to put
and
that
so
in
on and so forth.
perspective, if Greece took every single penny the company generates, it would
the
still be only
country-
about halfway to paying off its debt.
Well, I'm not even certain it was halfway. And that's the reason why the IMF said this week that they don't think that they could continue to be a part of the Troika because their rules require them to operate in circumstances where there's some probability of success. Mm-hmm. And so as far as they're concerned, from all their calculations, this is a bridge too far. And they don't, the only way that there's any prospect of Greece, in a sense, coming back into the black is literally debt relief, which is something the European, what they call them creditors, mm-hmm. the European banks in particular have not been willing to countenance.
And Angela Merkel has been at the forefront of that.
Well, she's, at the end of the day, if the banks have to do write-offs for Greece, then by definition, the state will have to look after the banks. In the same way, for example, that Trinidad was facing this situation in 1989 in the sense of Workers' Bank, when there was Workers' Bank failure, and the state basically stepped in. All the shareholders lost their money. That is the possibility. So that in a sense, what Angela Merkel is attempting to avoid is dealing with a banking fallout, which the state will have to spend money on either way. So it's either that she puts money into the banks, and it's probably more sensible for her to do that than to put money in directly into Greece, where there'll be a fair backlash. And this has some very significant issues. Greece is, from a European concept, and I think what we have to understand is the economics and the politics of the euro. There are 27 countries in the euro, not in the eurozone, in the European Union, but only, I think, somewhere between 17 to 19 members are part of the unified currency. But what that means is that the 17 countries can't print money as they want. In a sense, all they can do is adjust fiscal policy. Monetary policy, in a sense, is run by the ECB. And the ECB is headquartered in Germany. And the principal charter requirement of the ECB is to ensure that there is no inflation. Now, why is that such a critical issue? Because Germany herself suffered a period of hyperinflation in between the two world wars. Mm-hmm. And as a result of which, it ended up with what one would call an extreme right-wing government, which went to war. So the whole concept of the European Union as a concept, in a sense, is about political union. It's about harmonization. It's about a certain sense of coordination in terms of our economic policies. And on that basis, and that is where Greece found us. It's where Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, all ran to grief. Because when they run into economic problems, they can't, in a sense, issue more dollars. They can only do it from the fiscal perspective. And the fiscal perspective effectively means that how much money can the state spend? And at this stage of the game, it means that the state has to spend less money because it could tax less, because the size of the economy is shrinking. So on that basis, it can't keep the same social programs in position.
But isn't that a fundamental flaw of the European Union or any such union?
It is a significant flaw.
It is putting one monetary policy, spreading it over multiple types of economies. Because there is really no comparison between the economy of Greece and the economy of Germany.
No, correct. That's correct, because the economy of Greece is not sufficiently diversified. It is largely, if you want, a farming community associated with services and shipping. And much of the shipping, or the Greek shipping tycoons, don't have their business in Greek. It's offshore. So part of the argument is that a substantial portion of Greece does not pay tax. And Greece also, in terms of its antecedents, was socialist. You could say communist, by virtue of its policies. So as a result, from a labor perspective, and the argument has always been that the pension benefits are too high, people are allowed to go on retirement too early. So from that perspective, the ratio of number of people working to retirees is out of whack. Those things have to put into position. You have to, and this is actually some of the conditionalities that are currently included in the agreement, that you must push the retirement age back. So right now the argument is that the retirement age must go back to 67. In other words, even if you choose to retire before 67, anywhere between the ages 60 and 67, no retirement benefits are going to be paid until you are at 67. So what is the concept of retirement? The concept of retirement essentially is you don't work
and you get paid.
And you get paid, or you get all your accumulated benefits. And also they've also increased the level of taxation. So those who are pensioners who may have fallen into the lower bands are also paying a fairly high rate of tax. So you're being taxed on your pension as well. So that's one of the reasons why it's the whole concept of the adjustment program and what it means for the ordinary man in the street essentially means austerity.
But isn't it also going to shrink? It's already been shrinking, but isn't it going to shrink the Greek economy even further?
That's correct.
Making it less able to even pay back what it owes.
And that's one of the reasons why, at the end of the day, given the fact that it's one currency and that the Greek government has and that's one of the reasons why the banks were closed, right? To have euros, you have to be part of the European Stability Mechanism. You have to be able to borrow money from the European Central Bank, and to borrow money from the European Central Bank, you have to have good and valuable securities. And good and valuable securities in this instance generally means treasury bills that are issued by the state, i.e. Greece, but Greece has a limit
which are now junk.
They can't issue any more treasury bills, so what assets do they have? So effectively what has been happening, they call it capital controls. Right? That's a nice term for saying you can't take any more money out of the bank at this stage of the game, because if you take any more money out of the bank is going to become insolvent.
Well, I was listening to one BBC report indicating that at least one of the banks is already insolvent, and it's just being hidden by this action.
Well, that's more than likely to have taken place. There are a whole set of knock-on effects, and the economy is a very difficult thing to run. And that's why, from an economic perspective, you always need to have, in a sense, your monetary policy and your fiscal policy in balance. Now, the Greek government, and in fact any of the governments in the European Union, literally have no control over monetary policy. Monetary policy is the province of the ECB.
Now I have to ask you, now, obviously Greece cannot wake up last week Wednesday and realize, oh, we're in a very deep hole that we may never get out of. Obviously it's taken some time to get to this point, and it's been encouraged by the European Union that's been bailing them out a couple of times before, and yet seeing that it wasn't working. So why did any of the mechanisms not control Greece to the extent that it could have slowed down this decline?
Well, two things, maybe three, but let's go with the first two. The critical problem is this, that when you were coming into the European Union, in other words, to become part of the stability mechanism, to become part of the Eurozone, you had to have achieved what is considered to be fiscal stability. Fiscal stability meant that you were sustainable, means that the government could earn X amount of money, it could meet all of its requirements, that its social payments were not too high, and its debt level were good. As a result of which you could join the union, and there were some figures. The figures were that you had to have a primary balance, not a primary balance, you had to have overall surplus of 3%, that you wouldn't run deficits and so on and so forth. Well,
did Greece ever meet those requirements?
No, they never did.
But right? Germany was pushing for them to join.
Everybody was pushing for them, because remember, the European Union is really a political project. It's a political project based upon some economics. And the economics is just like CARICOM, that you would have some specialization and division of labor, that people will be able to do different things. But essentially, the political project is we don't want to go to war again. Right? We've had 2 world wars, the First World War, the Second World War, which left all of us in penury. It left us poor. It left us disheveled. We had to rebuild. It took a lot of effort to get here. We had to have high taxation rates. It was a very costly project in terms of human life. So we never want to go to war again. So we always want to be friendly. So we're going to establish this political union. We're going to build consistent values and a consistent legal framework so that we all be one people. That's the general idea behind it.
Which is all noble and everything, but not necessarily economically viable.
So noble, in fact, that it couldn't be left to the people to decide it. Because when they first came up with the Maastricht Treaty, you will remember that it went to a referendum, and the referendum basically said nobody wanted it. Right? And then they went through the back door and still did it anyhow. Right? Even though the referendum said no. Right? So that some or the other, they managed to get everybody in. So the entire set of European peoples essentially joined the project, notwithstanding the general feeling on the ground, which we didn't want loss of sovereignty. Well, guess what? That's exactly what took place. But through it all, they have had some dominant partners that have come through from this. And the dominant partners, the people who pushed this project, and from a political perspective and from an economic perspective, have also been 2 of its major beneficiaries, France and Germany. So in part of this all background, what we have now, we have a country, Greece, that technically never met any of the requirements for being in the Eurozone. But it's here now. It's already part of the Eurozone. If we let it go, what does that mean for the stability of the project? It means that the next person, and there are 5 candidates, there's what you call it, there's Ireland, there's Portugal, Spain, who themselves have had pretty rough times. If they were to go, if Greece was allowed to go, and Greece is admittedly a very small part of the Eurozone, it's only about 2% of the total Eurozone GDP, so technically it's small. That's like not having any growth in 1 year. You can make up for Greece. So if that were to happen, but at the same token, what it says is that on the next time we run into a problem, the Eurozone could lose another member. And if you start losing members along those lines, well, what's holding it together? The second difficulty is that Greece is also one of those Mediterranean countries that exist on the border. So it's pretty close to Russia on one side, but it's also on the Mediterranean. So anybody who could come in from Syria, from Libya, and it could be very much of a failed state. So a failed state on my borders means that I have a whole set of economic immigrants, right, who are coming in and they're coming through a porous border. So it's in my position to keep Greece in the European Union and keep them basically staying within the European conventions.
And why is it to Greece's benefit to be forced to go cap in hand and be basically treated like a child by the European Union?
Well, it's not to their benefit. And let me just continue with some of the other problems. And at the same token, if we are soft towards Greece, what happens to the countries that went through austerity? What happens to Portugal? What happens to Spain? What happens to Ireland? These are countries which, for example, increase their rates of tax, reduce the levels of social expenditures, and generally speaking had to make fairly significant payments towards meeting its obligations to the IMF. I think we all understand what the structural adjustment program is. And for those of us who are old enough and who had to go through it. So if that happens, and there's always a political price to pay, Syriza has come to the fore precisely because there was austerity. And the people felt that this wouldn't work. We didn't want any more of it. So we wanted a government that would change. But what would happen to the governments in Spain, Italy, Portugal, or Ireland, who all sorts of have left-wing, in a sense, oppositions waiting on their doorstep? Well, it means immediately that you're moving away from a sort of centrist right-wing Europe to one that has a strong left-wing element. Well, that in a sense, politically is not acceptable because it raises other issues. And on the other side of the fence, if you give in to Greece, you also have a strong right-wing element in Finland, in Germany, in Holland. How will they approach it? So that it, in a sense, there's no win-win situation here. So what they have done on every occasion is fudge. And that's one of the reasons why it was so important when the IMF came into the position, and the IMF made the point last week. It said very definitively that Greek debt is unsustainable in its current form. The IMF probably always knew that, but they went along as part of a troika. Part of the reason why they went along with what everybody was doing, because the IMF does not have its resources, the total resources, to be able to deal with Ireland, Greece, Spain,
Portugal.
The other countries in Eurozone, the pigs in Eurozone, that were in economic difficulty, didn't have the resources on its own. That raises a whole other set of issues with regard to the strength of the IMF and the World Bank. That puts us into a different zone of politics and, in a sense, political economy, because it meant that these were fundamental institutions, are supposed to be strong institutions that are meant to be able to deal with these types of crises, but they don't have the resources to be able to deal with it. That's why it was part of a troika.
No, this inevitably is going to lead to some instability within Greece
there
itself.
are what you call it. There are huge consequences, and there are many questions that are being asked now in terms of what type of policies you use. Is the European Union project sustainable? Is the euro sustainable as an alternative currency, as a second currency? And there are some other issues that go with that too. So that there are a number of questions from both from a political level, and that's one of the reasons why, notwithstanding all the bad economics, right, that they came to a deal. Right? In a sense, it was better to have some sort of political deal than to have none at all. Has it solved the issues? No. No, it won't. And that's one of the reasons why I make the point that the IMF intervention at this stage of the game that says that the only thing that will solve Greece is debt write-off, which Germany does not want to hear.
Well, that seems quite obvious, doesn't it? I mean, and Germany, of course, had its own debt write-off not that long ago.
True.
Having learned the lessons that reparations didn't work after the First World War.
Correct.
And in fact led to Nazism.
In fact, one author in the European press called it a Carthaginian philosophy, meaning, if you remember, Rome versus Carthage, eventually Carthage was destroyed. And in the same circumstances, you haven't been given a benefit, you have been given an allowance. Right? You are being so hard on people, for example, who need it at this stage of the game. So that the agreement that we've come to this week, it is not clear from a technical perspective that the agreement is sustainable. And the argument is very simple. We've done one structural adjustment program. We've done two structural adjustment programs. This is the third structural adjustment program. What is going to make this one more successful than the other? And the reason why the IMF has pulled out, debt relief in the first instance, and they also say that the arithmetic, the numbers are wrong. If they had done this earlier, and we could have come to a conclusion, then the economy would not have been so bad. There would not have been such a general loss of confidence. If you want, the balance of payments would not be in the terrible shape it is in as it is now. So that, can Greece survive doing this? And in the IMF perspective, the answer is no. You'll have to do something else.
What form of survival? Just eking out an existence, basically?
Well, yes, you're right. Just eking out
for generations to come.
For generations to come. I mean,
would it have been possible for Greece to just pull out?
And that most of the economists, most of the economists, but that would mean austerity too.
So there's no winning.
That would mean austerity too, because if you go back to the drachma, right, essentially
they would have to default.
It would have to default immediately. It also means by defaulting, what you're also doing is also leading immediately to a devaluation. And doing to a devaluation means everything that you import into Greece now becomes even more expensive. So that you would have done the same level of austerity, except not doing it from the tax side, you would have done it from the currency side. So you now have control. You could issue drachmas, but the issue is runaway inflation, higher levels of poverty. The state, in terms of its ability to provide social services, is completely gone. So you're pauperizing the population. So it's a continued sense of austerity for quite some time.
So this is the lesser of two evils, this plan.
Well, I don't know that you could get away from either evil. That's the point. Both of them are in the same position.
I can understand the reluctance of countries like Germany to do debt forgiveness, because then it'll be expected from Portugal, Spain, and Ireland as well.
Yes.
But I mean,
those are much bigger debts.
But there are ways of doing debt forgiveness without actually calling it debt forgiveness.
Which is what one suspects, that we won't talk about it now because it's not politically acceptable to deal with it now. But let's just walk through this. we'll find a way to help you out. But 3 years from now, we will look at the situation again. So what they've done is literally postpone the inevitable. We're going to get to the stage where you're either going to have to, in a sense, come out of the European Union and devalue. Right now, that has huge implications. It's the same issue that we have in the Caribbean. How does devaluation help us? We have very weakly diversified economies. We don't produce, if you want, capital goods. And by capital goods, we mean sophisticated pieces of equipment or machinery. We depend in large measure, if you want, on social services. And social services, for example, tourism. We depend in large measure on tourism. And our exports are not high-value exports. So the argument is that Spain can come out because they actually have a manufacturing sector, that even Portugal can come out. Even France has a little problem coming up. France is another issue that is on the horizon because its debt to GDP ratio is just about 100%. So they themselves have to
figures
consider,
before we started talking, and I was just shocked at the high levels of debt to GDP in Europe.
but because you after the Second World War, you had many countries that followed socialist principles, which was state intervention, high levels of state control, high levels of social services, generally early retirement positioning. So that means that the number of people who are working in the private sector and who are working for a continuous period and generating surplus are in shorter numbers. So that so you would find that the countries of the south are a little bit different from the countries of the north. And even within countries, you have variations. For example, southern Spain is against northern Spain, southern Italy is against northern Italy. The economies vary strongly. One weaker, one stronger. One having more industrial diversification, one being more of an industrial base, the other one being based more on the level of tourism and related services. So that it's not an equal playing field at all. And that is what brings the whole European Union concept into dispute. Is it sustainable? And is it sustainable with a currency which effectively requires a difference between monetary policy and political policy?
So basically, what you're saying is a political construct over which a monetary overlay was put.
Correct.
But the two aren't necessarily compatible.
The two are not necessarily compatible.
We have about 3 minutes left. Is this going to have any kind of knock-on effect for the rest of the world?
Well, yes, it will, to the extent to which, well, what has happened immediately in capital markets is what is called a flight to safety. The Eurozone, and in fact the Euro, was being looked at as an alternative currency. In much the same way, for example, that the Deutschmark used to be an alternative currency and sterling used to be a definitive currency. Now we have only one clear reserve currency, which is the US dollar. That has some implications in terms of world geopolitics, because then what is the position with regard to China and the renminbi? What is the position with regard to Japan and the use of the yen? So some issues in terms of where capital goes to. Right now, and that's one of the reasons why North America's recovery has been reasonably modulated. They're not out of the woods as yet by any stretch of imagination, but their interest rates, and that's one of the reasons why they've kept their interest rates low, because if the interest rate goes up too fast, you're going to find a lot of money moving into the States. And the result is you could very well find a capital asset boom. In other words, prices of real property start to move up, prices of buildings, prices of a lot of stuff, without necessarily any underlying change in the way that the economy functions. So that they have been following cautiously a low interest rate scenario. We don't really want your cash. Don't bring it here. Don't come and give us too much. Don't invest in our treasury bills. And if you invest in our treasury bills, understand we're not going to pay you a lot for it. So that is one of the instances. The other issue that follows from that is that it could have an effect in terms of countries which are smaller, such as ourselves, when we run into issues. Because it therefore means that the risk rate or the risk premium on our borrowing or international borrowing goes up. So that can have a significant effect on us. And of course, when your rate goes up, it means that the amount that you have to pay increases. And if the amount that you have to pay increases, means that as a state, you have to put aside more money of your tax dollars for debt service, which means there's less money to spend on developmental programs. And at the moment, most countries in the region already are in a difficulty where that is concerned, because we already have a high level of social services expenditure. So that the amount that we can spend on the development program is small anyhow. To spend more in terms of debt service means that the amount we can spend on capital investment and or the development program becomes smaller. So those are the kinds of issues. It's a matter of balance, but we are in difficult territory.
Just out of curiosity, in the CARICOM region, which country is the worst off in terms of debt to GDP? Would that be Jamaica?
Well, Jamaica is probably one of the highest, but the worst is St. Kitts.
St. Kitts.
St. Kitts.
I've learned something new today.
St. Kitts and Nevis is 200 and something percent. They've recently done some level of debt forgiveness. They brought it down, I think, to about 180%. Jamaica is somewhere in the region about 140. Barbados, which was always the most fiscally prudent of us all, is somewhere in the region about 110, 100. St. Lucia, St. Vincent are on the high end, but below 70. 70 tends to be a trigger number. So they're somewhere between 60 and 70. Antigua is on the high end. Antigua is likely never to be able to repay its debt either.
Wow.
All right.
I always learn something new when you're on the program, and it's not always good news either. Mariano Browne, always a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.